January 26, 1945, a day forever etched in the annals of military history. The brutal winter sun cast weak shadows across the snow-covered fields outside Holtzwihr, France, as 19-year-old Lieutenant Audie Murphy stared through his binoculars in disbelief. What he witnessed in that moment defied 18 years of expectations about warfare, heroism, and his own mortality. The scene unfolding before his eyes would later be described as impossible by military analysts. One man against an advancing force of 250 elite German infantry, supported by 6 tanks. Second Lieutenant James Corey, positioned in the woods behind Murphy, would later recall the surreal tableau with haunting clarity. "I saw this kid, this baby-faced Texan, no bigger than a minute, climb onto a burning tank destroyer like it was a Sunday stroll. The Germans were coming from all sides. The snow was kicking up with bullets, and there he was, firing that .50 caliber like he was immortal. I knew I was watching a man die. We all did, but he just wouldn't die." The frozen ground beneath Murphy's boots vibrated with the approaching German armor. Each thundering step of the enemy advance should have triggered every survival instinct to flee. Instead, Murphy did the unthinkable. As his outnumbered company retreated to the tree line behind him, Murphy climbed atop a burning M10 tank destroyer, flames licking dangerously close to its fuel tank and ammunition stores. The acrid smell of diesel fuel and cordite filled his nostrils as he gripped the .50 caliber machine gun. His hands, already numb from the biting cold, somehow maintained perfect control as he swung the weapon toward the advancing German line. "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards," Murphy shouted into his field telephone to an artillery coordinator, his Texas drawl audible even over the din of battle. The statement, so casual amid such chaos, would become legendary among the men of the 3rd Infantry Division. For the next 70 minutes, as German bullets ricocheted off the metal around him, Murphy held his position. The burning vehicle could have exploded at any moment, yet there he stood, all 5 feet 5 inches of him, defying an overwhelming enemy force through sheer will and deadly accuracy. What the Germans could not have known in that moment was that they faced no ordinary American soldier. They had encountered a sharecropper's son who had been surviving against impossible odds since the day he was born. A boy who had shouldered adult responsibilities from age 10, who had hunted to feed his family when they had no food, who had already killed more enemy soldiers than anyone could reasonably count. The Germans at Holtzwihr faced Audie Murphy, a name they would soon know all too well. The story of how this unlikely hero came to be standing on that burning tank, single-handedly holding back a German battalion, begins far from the battlefields of Europe, in the harshest poverty of rural Texas during America's Great Depression. To understand the magnitude of Murphy's actions at Holtzwihr, one must first understand the forge that shaped him, the brutal reality that had prepared him for war long before he ever held a military rifle. Audie Leon Murphy entered the world on June 20th, 1925, in a one-room sharecropper's shack near Kingston, Hunt County, Texas. He was the 7th of 12 children born to Emmett and Josie Bell Murphy. The ramshackle structure that served as their home could barely keep out the rain, much less provide comfort against the extreme Texas heat or occasional winter chills. The Murphy family existed in a reality that many Americans could hardly imagine, one where hunger wasn't an occasional discomfort, but a constant companion. Emmett Murphy, Audie's father, worked sporadically as a tenant farmer, but his contributions to family life were irregular and unreliable. By 1931, as the Great Depression tightened its grip on America, Emmett Murphy abandoned his wife and children entirely, leaving them to fend for themselves in a world that already offered them precious little. Audie, just 6 years old, began to understand that survival would depend entirely on his own actions and choices. By age 10, Audie had dropped out of school to help support his family. While other children played games and learned to read, young Murphy picked cotton for 25 cents per 100 pounds harvested. His small fingers would bleed from the sharp cotton bolls, but he never complained. The $1 he might earn in a good day was often the difference between his family eating or going hungry. When not working in the fields, he hunted rabbits and squirrels with remarkable accuracy, bringing home essential protein for his siblings and ailing mother. In school, on the rare occasions he could attend, other children mockingly called him short breeches because his only pair of pants had shrunk from endless washing. The constant poverty shaped not just his physical stature. Murphy would reach adulthood standing only 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing barely 130 pounds, but also forged an inner determination that bordered on the superhuman. Where others saw limitations, Murphy saw only challenges to overcome. When Murphy turned 16, tragedy struck again. His beloved mother died from pneumonia and heart failure, a death that might have been prevented with adequate medical care they could never afford. Within weeks, his younger siblings were sent to an orphanage. The family that had already endured so much was now completely shattered. For many, such devastating losses might have broken their spirit permanently. For Audie Murphy, it merely added another layer of steel to an already formidable will. By the time Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, Murphy had experienced more hardship than most men face in a lifetime. When America entered World War II, Murphy saw not just a patriotic duty, but perhaps an escape from the grinding poverty that had defined his existence. There was only one problem. At 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing only 110 pounds, he was rejected by both the Marines and the Navy for being too small and underweight. The Army, desperate for manpower as the war expanded, finally accepted Murphy after his sister helped him falsify his birth date on the enlistment papers, making him appear old enough to join. On June 30th, 1942, just days after his 17th birthday, Audie Murphy became Private Murphy of the United States Army. His transformation from impoverished Texan to military legend had begun. Basic training at Camp Walters, Texas, introduced Murphy to military discipline and structure. Despite his small stature, which earned him the nickname Baby from his drill sergeants, Murphy demonstrated exceptional proficiency with firearms, a skill honed through years of hunting to feed his family. While he only qualified as a marksman on the official range because of the rigid firing positions required, his instructors quickly noted his uncanny ability to hit moving targets from any stance. He wasn't built like a soldier, recalled Staff Sergeant Peterson, one of Murphy's instructors. He was small, quiet, almost shy. But when that boy picked up a rifle, something changed. I've been training soldiers for 15 years, and I'd never seen anyone with such natural ability to track and shoot. It was like he became one with the weapon. After completing advanced infantry training at Fort Meade, Maryland, Murphy was assigned to Company B, 1st Battalion, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. In February 1943, he shipped out for North Africa, where Allied forces were engaged in pushing back Axis powers. Murphy would not see combat immediately, as he arrived after major fighting in the region had concluded. However, the intensive training he received there, including grueling 30-mile marches in full gear and live-fire exercises, would prepare him for what lay ahead. Murphy's first taste of combat came during the Allied invasion of Sicily in July 1943. As a division runner carrying messages between units, Murphy had his initial encounters with enemy fire. Where many soldiers froze or panicked in their first engagement, Murphy displayed an eerie calmness that would become his trademark. During one mission, he encountered 2 fleeing Italian officers and, without hesitation, shot them both. This action, while brutal, demonstrated Murphy's instinctive understanding that, in combat, any hesitation could mean death. By September 1943, as Allied forces prepared to invade mainland Italy, Murphy had been promoted to corporal. The Italian campaign would prove to be some of the most brutal fighting of the war, with German forces establishing multiple defensive lines across the mountainous terrain. It was here that Murphy's extraordinary combat abilities began to reveal themselves. Near the village of Anzio in January 1944, Murphy's company came under heavy German fire, pinning them down in exposed positions. Rather than seeking cover, Murphy worked his way toward the German position, methodically eliminating machine gun nests that had been decimating his fellow soldiers. For this action, he received his first Bronze Star with V device for valor. As the fighting continued across Italy, Murphy's reputation grew. Fellow soldiers spoke in hushed tones about the baby-faced Texan who seemed to possess a sixth sense in combat, knowing when to advance, when to take cover, and most importantly, where enemy soldiers would be before they revealed themselves. His company commander, recognizing Murphy's natural leadership abilities, promoted him to sergeant despite his youth. The invasion of southern France in August 1944 saw Murphy's legend grow exponentially. During Operation Dragoon, as American forces pushed inland from the Mediterranean coast, Murphy's unit encountered fierce German resistance near the town of Ramatuelle. Separated from his men and armed only with his M1 carbine, Murphy encountered a German machine gun emplacement that had his company pinned down. Without backup and with no heavy weapons, Murphy single-handedly flanked the position, killed the crew, and turned their own machine gun against a nearby group of German infantry. This audacious action earned him the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second-highest military honor. By the time the action concluded, Murphy had personally killed or wounded 15 German soldiers and captured 8 more, all while operating completely alone. Murphy's actions in France continued to defy conventional military wisdom. Near the town of Lomé in October 1944, he climbed a hillside under intense enemy fire to destroy a machine gun nest that had halted his company's advance. After eliminating the threat, he returned multiple times through a hail of bullets to retrieve an American machine gun and ammunition, which he then used to clear the entire hillside of German forces. For this action, he received his first Silver Star. Just 3 days later, Murphy earned a second Silver Star when he rescued members of a forward reconnaissance patrol that had been ambushed. Finding them pinned down and suffering casualties, Murphy advanced alone, systematically eliminating 8 German soldiers and forcing the remainder to retreat. His citation noted his indomitable courage and uncommon devotion to duty, qualities that were becoming Murphy's hallmark. By this point, Murphy had earned battlefield promotion to second lieutenant, a remarkable achievement for someone with only a 5th-grade education. He was now leading men 10 to 15 years his senior. Soldiers who gladly followed his commands because they had witnessed his extraordinary competence in combat. Despite his growing collection of medals and citations, Murphy remained humble and focused solely on the welfare of his men and the mission at hand. The physical toll of combat was beginning to accumulate, however. In October 1944, Murphy was wounded by a German sniper's bullet that struck him in the hip. Evacuated to a field hospital, Murphy developed a serious infection that resulted in gangrene, requiring extensive treatment. Most soldiers would have welcomed extended hospital recuperation, but Murphy checked himself out against medical advice after learning of the massive German counteroffensive in the Ardennes, what would become known as the Battle of the Bulge. Still walking with a noticeable limp from his wound, Murphy rejoined his unit as they were moved to the Colmar Pocket, an area in northeastern France still firmly under German control. The winter of 1944-45 was one of the coldest on record in Europe, with temperatures regularly dropping well below zero. American troops, including Murphy's company, struggled not only against a determined enemy, but against the brutal elements that froze equipment and caused widespread frostbite. By January 1945, Murphy's company had been reduced to just 40 men, 1/3 of its standard complement. Despite this undermanned state, they were ordered to hold a strategically vital road junction near the village of Holtzwihr until reinforcements could arrive. The promised backup, however, was delayed due to the terrible weather and ongoing fighting elsewhere. On January 26th, as Murphy's men tried to maintain their positions in the bitter cold, German artillery suddenly opened fire on their location. Through his binoculars, Murphy observed 6 German tanks emerging from the nearby woods, followed by what he estimated to be 250 infantry soldiers in white winter camouflage. The German force outnumbered Murphy's company by more than 6 to 1, with armor support that the Americans lacked. Making a quick tactical assessment, Murphy ordered his men to withdraw to a more defensible position in the woods behind their current location. He remained at his forward observation post, using a field telephone to call in artillery strikes on the advancing Germans. As enemy fire intensified around him, a nearby American M10 tank destroyer was hit and caught fire, its crew abandoning the vehicle before it could explode. What happened next would enter the realm of military legend. Rather than retreating with his men, Murphy climbed aboard the burning tank destroyer, which could have detonated at any moment from the flames reaching its ammunition storage. Taking control of the vehicle's .50 caliber machine gun, he began firing on the advancing German infantry with devastating accuracy. For more than an hour, Murphy maintained this exposed position, firing the heavy machine gun in long, controlled bursts that cut down dozens of German soldiers. When asked later how he could have remained so calm in such a perilous situation, Murphy simply replied, "They were killing my friends." From his position atop the burning vehicle, Murphy was exposed to enemy fire from 3 sides. German bullets struck the destroyer all around him, with several grazing his clothing and one wounding him in the leg. Yet he maintained his position, alternating between firing the machine gun and calling in artillery coordinates via his field telephone. At one point, when an artillery coordinator asked how close the Germans were to his position, Murphy famously responded, "Just hold the phone and I'll let you talk to one of the bastards." The smoke from the burning tank destroyer actually worked to Murphy's advantage, partially obscuring him from German view, while the constant roar of battle masked the sound of his machine gun fire. The Germans, unable to pinpoint the source of the devastating fire cutting through their ranks, continued to advance, directly into Murphy's killing zone. Private Anthony Abramsky, watching from the tree line, later described the scene, "It was the greatest display of guts and courage I have ever seen. For an hour he stood up there and fought against impossible odds. The Germans just kept coming, and he just kept mowing them down. I expected to see the whole damn tank destroyer blow up under him any minute." As the battle raged, the German infantry moved to within 10 yards of Murphy's position, so close that he could clearly see their faces through the smoke and snow. Yet not one reached the American lines. By the time Murphy exhausted his ammunition, the German attack had collapsed entirely, with dozens of bodies strewn across the snow-covered field. Only when his ammunition was completely expended did Murphy finally abandon his position, jumping from the still-burning tank destroyer moments before it exploded. Despite being wounded and exhausted, he refused evacuation and instead organized his men for a counterattack that drove the remaining Germans back into the woods. The numerical toll of Murphy's stand is staggering. Intelligence reports later confirmed he had personally killed or wounded over 50 German soldiers. His actions had single-handedly broken the back of a regimental-sized assault that, if successful, could have compromised the entire American position in the Colmar Pocket. What one man had accomplished should have required an entire company of soldiers with armor support. News of Murphy's extraordinary stand spread quickly through American lines. His division commander, Major General John W. O'Daniel, immediately recommended him for the Medal of Honor, the nation's highest military decoration. The official citation would read in part, "Second Lieutenant Murphy's indomitable courage and his refusal to give an inch of ground saved his company from possible encirclement and destruction and enabled it to hold the woods, which had been the enemy's objective." On June 2, 1945, at an airfield near Salzburg, Austria, Lieutenant General Alexander Patch presented Audie Murphy with the Medal of Honor. At just 19 years of age, Murphy had received every combat award for valor that the United States Army could bestow, plus additional decorations from France and Belgium. In total, he had earned 33 medals and citations, making him the most decorated American soldier of World War II. Yet, statistics and medals tell only part of the story. What makes Murphy's achievements all the more remarkable is the context in which they occurred. This was not a professional soldier with years of military training, but a malnourished Texas sharecropper's son with a fifth-grade education. This was a young man who had been rejected by multiple military branches for being too small, too light, too physically unimposing. How did this seemingly unremarkable youth become America's most celebrated combat soldier? The answer lies partly in the crucible of his early life. The hardships that might have broken many others had instead forged in Murphy an almost supernatural resilience. Years of hunting for survival had given him marksmanship abilities that few trained soldiers could match. The responsibility of feeding his family from a young age had instilled a level of maturity and decision-making capability well beyond his years. But there was something else, something less tangible, that set Murphy apart. Fellow soldiers frequently commented on his unusual calmness under fire, an almost detached quality that allowed him to function with deadly efficiency, while others were paralyzed by fear. Murphy himself later described this state. The nerves will relax, the heart stop its thumping. The brain will turn to animal cunning. The job is directly before us: destroy and survive. This ability to control fear, or perhaps to channel it into focused action, gave Murphy a decisive edge in combat situations. While others ducked for cover, he advanced. Where others hesitated, he acted with immediate, lethal precision. It was as if the extreme poverty and hardship of his youth had already exposed him to the worst life could offer, making the dangers of combat seem almost manageable by comparison. Following Germany's surrender in May 1945, Murphy was withdrawn from combat duty and assigned as a liaison officer for the remainder of his military service. His war was over, but his legend was just beginning to spread throughout America. When Murphy returned to the United States in June 1945, he received a hero's welcome unlike anything seen since Charles Lindbergh's transatlantic flight. His boyish face appeared on the cover of Life magazine, and parades were held in his honor across Texas. The contrast between his battlefield accomplishments and his unassuming appearance fascinated the American public. Here was a baby-faced youth who had performed feats of courage that seemed impossible for even the most hardened warrior. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighing 135 pounds, Murphy looked more like a high school student than America's most decorated soldier. Actor James Cagney, seeing Murphy's photograph in Life magazine, contacted the young hero and invited him to Hollywood, convinced that his remarkable story and photogenic face could translate to movie stardom. Murphy initially resisted, feeling uncomfortable with the attention and doubtful of his abilities as an actor. Nevertheless, he eventually accepted Cagney's invitation, moving to California in 1945 to begin a new chapter in his extraordinary life. The transition from combat hero to civilian was not easy. Like many returning veterans, Murphy struggled with what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. At the time it was called battle fatigue or shell shock and was poorly understood by the medical community. Murphy suffered from insomnia, nightmares, and emotional volatility. He often slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow, a habit that alarmed those close to him. Murphy's initial experiences in Hollywood were discouraging. Despite Cagney's sponsorship, roles were scarce, and Murphy's lack of acting experience was evident. For a time, he lived in a gymnasium, struggling financially, despite his national hero status. When asked about this difficult period, Murphy displayed the same stoic resilience that had carried him through childhood poverty and the horrors of war. "I've been hungry before," he said simply. His breakthrough came in 1949 with the film Bad Boy, in which he played a troubled youth. Though not a major critical success, the film demonstrated Murphy's natural screen presence and led to a contract with Universal Pictures. Over the next decade, he would appear in more than 40 films, primarily westerns and war movies that capitalized on his authentic combat experience. In 1955, Universal released To Hell and Back, the film adaptation of Murphy's war memoir of the same name. In an unprecedented casting decision, Murphy played himself, recreating the very actions that had earned him the Medal of Honor and numerous other decorations. The film became Universal's highest-grossing release until Jaws 20 years later, cementing Murphy's status as both a war hero and a Hollywood star. The irony of Murphy's film career was not lost on him or those who knew him well. Here was a man who had experienced the genuine horrors of combat, now pretending to fight in sanitized Hollywood versions of war. The very experiences that continued to haunt his dreams were being packaged as entertainment for American moviegoers who could never truly understand what he had endured. Despite his Hollywood success, Murphy remained troubled by his wartime experiences. The psychological wounds of combat proved far more persistent than his physical injuries. He spoke candidly about his struggles with PTSD at a time when most veterans suffered in silence, becoming one of the first high-profile advocates for greater understanding and treatment of combat-related psychological trauma. "I can't tell you how many nights I've awakened in a cold sweat, thinking I was back in combat," Murphy once confessed in an interview. "Sometimes I'm afraid to go to sleep because I know what's waiting for me in my dreams. People see the medals and think they know what war is about. They don't have any idea." Murphy's advocacy extended beyond words to action. He lobbied government officials to provide better mental health services for veterans, arguing that the psychological casualties of war deserve the same level of care as the physically wounded. His willingness to speak openly about his own struggles helped reduce the stigma surrounding battle fatigue and encouraged other veterans to seek help. As the years passed, Murphy's film career gradually waned. By the late 1960s, Western films were falling out of favor with American audiences, and Murphy found roles increasingly scarce. Financial problems mounted as well, exacerbated by poor investment decisions and a fondness for gambling. The boy who had once hunted to feed his family now found himself struggling financially despite having achieved fame and success beyond anything he could have imagined in his youth. Throughout these difficulties, Murphy maintained the quiet dignity and resilience that had characterized his entire life. When offered lucrative endorsement deals for alcohol and tobacco products, he declined, stating that he did not want to set a bad example for the many young people who admired him. Despite his own financial troubles, he remained committed to certain principles that were more important to him than money. On May 28, 1971, Murphy boarded a private plane in Virginia, intending to investigate a business opportunity. The aircraft encountered severe weather and crashed into Brush Mountain near Roanoke, killing all 6 people aboard, including Murphy. He was 45 years old. The nation mourned the loss of its most decorated soldier, a man whose incredible journey had taken him from desperate poverty to the heights of military glory and Hollywood fame. Murphy was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. In recognition of his singular place in American military history, his grave site is the second most visited at Arlington, surpassed only by that of President John F. Kennedy. The simple white headstone gives little indication of the extraordinary life it commemorates, listing only his name, dates of birth and death, and the words Medal of Honor. The legacy of Audie Murphy extends far beyond his military decorations or film career. His life story represents something quintessentially American, the belief that circumstances of birth need not determine one's destiny. From the direst poverty, Murphy rose to become not just a decorated soldier, but a cultural icon whose name remains synonymous with courage more than half a century after his death. Perhaps the most powerful aspect of Murphy's legacy is the way it challenges our preconceptions about heroism. In an era that often celebrates physical strength and imposing stature, Murphy reminds us that true courage comes from within. His slight build and youthful appearance belied an indomitable spirit that could not be measured by conventional standards. As one of his commanding officers once remarked, "There's nothing in his record to indicate that he's 5 feet 5 inches tall and weighs only 130 pounds. He fights like he's 10 feet tall and bulletproof." The story of Audie Murphy's stand at Holt's Weir on that January day in 1945 has been told and retold countless times, sometimes with embellishments that the habitually modest Murphy would have rejected. Yet even the unadorned facts of what transpired are almost beyond belief. One man exposed on a burning tank destroyer, holding off an enemy force many times his size through sheer determination and skill. Those who witnessed Murphy's stand that day could scarcely process what they were seeing. Private First Class Anthony Abramsky, one of Murphy's men who watched from the tree line, later stated, "It was like something out of a movie, except no one would believe it if they saw it on screen. There he was, completely exposed, with bullets kicking up snow all around him, and he just kept firing that machine gun like he was invincible. I kept thinking, he can't possibly survive this, but somehow he did." For the German soldiers advancing across that snow-covered field, the experience must have been equally surreal. They had numerical superiority, armor support, and what should have been overwhelming firepower advantage. Yet they found themselves being systematically cut down by a single American soldier who refused to yield his position despite the flames licking at his feet from the vehicle beneath him. The psychological impact on the German troops was devastating. Having been told that American soldiers were soft, undisciplined, and quick to retreat when pressed, they instead encountered in Murphy a level of determination that bordered on the supernatural. As German casualties mounted and their advance stalled, the myth of American inferiority was shattered as completely as their tactical formation. Colonel Hans Weber, a German officer who survived the engagement and was later captured, described the effect on his men. "We could not understand what was happening. Our intelligence had told us the American position was lightly defended, yet we were meeting resistance as fierce as anything we had encountered on the Eastern Front. Only later did we learn it was primarily one man who had broken our attack. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was there in the bodies of our fallen comrades." The ripple effects of Murphy's actions extended far beyond that single engagement. His stand at Holt's Weir became a symbol of American resolve just as the war in Europe was entering its final, desperate phase. The story spread rapidly through Allied ranks, boosting morale and reinforcing the belief that victory, though still months away, was inevitable. As one military historian later noted, Murphy's stand represented in microcosm the larger Allied cause, outnumbered but unbowed, refusing to yield even when logic suggested retreat was the only option. For the men who served with Murphy, the impact was even more profound and personal. Many of them believed they owed their lives directly to his actions that day. Staff Sergeant Charles Owen, who served in Murphy's company, put it simply, "He saved our lives. If he hadn't done what he did, the Germans would have annihilated us. We were already beat down pretty bad and about out of ammunition. What he did gave us time to regroup and ultimately push them back." The aftermath of Murphy's stand revealed the extent of what he had accomplished. German bodies littered the field, with the highest concentration directly in front of the position Murphy had held. American intelligence officers counted 47 dead German soldiers within 50 yards of the burned-out tank destroyer, with dozens more wounded who had been dragged away by their retreating comrades. Major General Harold Blakely, visiting the site days later, was stunned by what he saw. "The physical evidence of what happened here is almost beyond comprehension," he reported. One man, with one machine gun, inflicted casualties that would normally require a full company with supporting arms. I've been in this man's army for 23 years, and I've never seen anything like it. The psychological transformation of the German forces facing the Americans in the Colmar Pocket was equally remarkable. Following Murphy's stand and the subsequent American counterattack, German resistance in the sector noticeably weakened. Prisoners taken in the days after the engagement appeared demoralized, with many expressing disbelief at the ferocity of American resistance. Lieutenant Colonel James Goodman, who debriefed German prisoners captured near Holzweier, reported, "There's been a definite shift in their attitude. Before, they were confident, even arrogant about their chances. Now they seem shaken. Several have mentioned an American officer who fought like 10 men on a burning tank. They speak of him with a kind of superstitious awe, as if he wasn't entirely human." For Murphy himself, the transformation was more complex. In the immediate aftermath of his stand, he refused medical treatment for his leg wound, insisting on leading his men in the counterattack that secured their position. When finally relieved 48 hours later, he collapsed from exhaustion and was evacuated to a field hospital. There, doctors discovered not only his recent wound, but evidence of previous injuries that had never been properly treated because Murphy had refused evacuation. Captain Roger Hawkins, the physician who treated Murphy, later recalled, "He was in worse shape than he let on. Besides the obvious leg wound, he had shrapnel fragments we hadn't even known about, lingering infection from his previous hip wound, severe frostbite in both feet, and was suffering from exhaustion that went beyond anything I'd seen. Most men in his condition would have been evacuated weeks earlier." The fact that he was still functioning, let alone fighting, was nothing short of miraculous. During his hospital recovery, Murphy received word that he had been recommended for the Medal of Honor. His reaction was characteristically modest. When congratulated by a visiting officer, Murphy reportedly shrugged and said, "I don't know what the fuss is about. I was just doing my job." This reflexive humility would remain a constant throughout Murphy's life, even as his fame grew to unprecedented levels. For Murphy, the psychological aftermath of Holzweier and his other combat experiences would prove far more enduring than his physical wounds. In the quiet moments of recovery, the full weight of what he had experienced began to settle on him. The adrenaline that had carried him through countless engagements was subsiding, allowing suppressed emotions to surface. A nurse who attended Murphy during this period noted in her journal, "The young lieutenant has terrible nightmares. He cries out in his sleep, names of men I assume were friends who died. During the day he's quiet, polite, almost shy. But at night the war returns to him. I wonder if he'll ever truly leave it behind." This prescient observation would prove tragically accurate. Murphy would indeed never fully leave the war behind. The psychological wounds he sustained would follow him through Hollywood success, financial ups and downs, and 2 marriages. The most decorated combat soldier in American history would fight his most difficult battles not on the fields of Europe, but in the privacy of his own mind. Yet, even as he struggled with these invisible wounds, Murphy found ways to transform his suffering into advocacy for others. At a time when combat-related psychological trauma was poorly understood and often stigmatized, he spoke openly about his experiences, helping to normalize discussion of what we now call PTSD. In doing so, he provided a voice for countless veterans who suffered in silence, too ashamed or confused to seek the help they needed. In a 1955 interview with a veterans publication, Murphy stated, "I don't think anyone who hasn't been through it can understand what combat does to a person. It's not just the danger or seeing your friends die. It's the weight of the decisions you make, knowing that lives depend on you getting it right. That stays with you. Some nights I wake up soaked in sweat thinking I'm back there. The war doesn't end just because you come home." This candid acknowledgement of his struggles, coming from America's most celebrated combat hero, helped challenge the prevailing notion that psychological distress was somehow evidence of weakness or moral failing. If Audie Murphy, whose courage was beyond question, could admit to nightmares and emotional difficulties, then perhaps other veterans could do the same without shame. The transformation of American society's understanding of combat trauma owes a significant debt to Murphy's willingness to speak about his experiences. His advocacy helped pave the way for improved veterans' mental health services and a more nuanced public understanding of war's psychological toll. In this sense, Murphy's most enduring legacy may be not the enemies he defeated in combat, but the barriers of stigma and silence he helped dismantle. When the Audie L. Murphy Memorial Veterans Hospital was dedicated in San Antonio, Texas in 1973. 2 years after his death, the ceremony included recognition not just of his battlefield heroism, but also his advocacy for veterans' mental health. The facility would go on to become a leader in the treatment of PTSD, helping thousands of veterans from World War II through subsequent conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. The statistical evidence of Murphy's impact on veterans' health care is substantial. In the decade following his public discussions of his own struggles, Veterans Administration hospitals reported a 30% increase in veterans seeking psychological services. This number would continue to grow as the stigma surrounding mental health issues gradually diminished, due in no small part to Murphy's pioneering openness. Dr. Raymond Phillips, who served as chief psychiatrist at the VA hospital in Houston during this period, observed, "We saw a definite shift after Murphy started speaking out. Veterans who had been suffering for years suddenly felt permission to acknowledge their problems. If the most decorated soldier in American history could admit to nightmares and flashbacks, they reasoned, perhaps they weren't weak for experiencing the same." The numerical transformation in attitudes was matched by a qualitative shift in how veterans' mental health was discussed in both professional circles and popular culture. Medical journals began publishing more research on combat trauma, moving beyond simplistic notions of shell shock toward a more nuanced understanding of what would eventually be classified as PTSD in 1980. Captain James Forrester, who served as Murphy's company commander before being wounded and evacuated, perhaps best summarized the paradox of Murphy's legacy. The numbers tell one story: 50 Germans killed in one engagement, 33 military decorations, 40 films, millions of dollars in box office receipts, but they don't capture the real Audie Murphy. His greatest achievement wasn't standing on that tank destroyer, as incredible as that was. It was having the courage to come home and tell the truth about what war does to the human soul. The transformation of Audie Murphy from combat hero to veterans advocate represented a profound evolution in how America understood its relationship with those who fought its wars. Previous generations had largely expected veterans to return home, reintegrate into civilian society, and keep their wartime experiences to themselves. Murphy helped demonstrate that such expectations were not just unrealistic, but actively harmful to those who had sacrificed so much. In a 1968 speech dedicating a war memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, Murphy addressed this issue directly. "We send young men to war and expect them to be unchanged by the experience. We ask them to witness and participate in events of unspeakable violence, then return home and act as if nothing unusual has happened. This is not just unreasonable, it is cruel. We owe our veterans more than parades and monuments. We owe them understanding, patience, and the medical care they need to heal wounds, both visible and invisible." The statistical reality Murphy highlighted was sobering. At the time of his speech, an estimated 500,000 World War II veterans were still experiencing significant psychological symptoms related to their service, yet fewer than 15% had sought any form of treatment. The economic cost of untreated combat trauma, measured in lost productivity, broken families, substance abuse, and in some cases suicide, was incalculable. For Murphy, this advocacy was deeply personal. Even as he spoke on behalf of others, he continued to battle his own demons. Friends reported that his nightmares and insomnia worsened over time rather than improving. He developed a dependency on prescription sleeping pills, at one point taking such high doses that colleagues on movie sets noticed his impaired functioning. David Williams, who directed Murphy in 3 films during the 1960s, recalled, "There were days when he was clearly struggling just to function. His hands would shake, his concentration would lapse. We'd sometimes have to shoot around him in the morning because the medication he took to sleep left him groggy. But he never complained, never made excuses. He'd apologize for any delays and push through, professional to the core." In the mid-1960s, recognizing his growing dependency, Murphy took the extraordinary step of locking himself in a hotel room for a week, enduring the painful withdrawal symptoms cold turkey, rather than seeking medical detoxification. This act of will, reminiscent of the determination he had shown at Holtzwihr, demonstrated that his inner strength remained intact despite years of psychological struggle. When asked why he had chosen such a difficult path to recovery, Murphy responded with characteristic directness. "I've seen too many men trade one dependency for another, pills for alcohol, alcohol for something else. I wanted to be free of it completely, even if that meant suffering through the worst of it on my own. After what I've been through, a week of feeling terrible didn't seem so bad." This successful battle against addiction became another chapter in Murphy's advocacy work. In speaking about his experience, he helped reduce the shame associated with both mental health struggles and substance dependency, issues that affected countless veterans but were rarely discussed openly. His candor helped many others seek the help they needed, creating a multiplier effect that extended his impact far beyond his personal circle. The lasting impact of Murphy's military service, film career, and advocacy work can be measured in multiple dimensions. Militarily, his actions saved lives directly, both those of his men at Holtzwihr and countless others whose positions would have been compromised had the German attack succeeded. His example inspired generations of soldiers who studied his tactics and attempted to emulate his courage. Culturally, his films, particularly To Hell and Back, helped shape America's understanding of World War II, presenting combat with a degree of authenticity unusual for Hollywood productions of the era. While still constrained by the conventions of 1950s filmmaking, Murphy's personal input ensured that his war movies avoided the worst excesses of glorification and sentimentality. Dr. Eleanor Christensen, a military historian who has studied Murphy's life extensively, notes, "His cinematic legacy is complex. On one hand, his films certainly romanticized aspects of combat in ways we might criticize today. On the other, they contained moments of genuine truth about fear, camaraderie, and the randomness of death in war, elements that came directly from Murphy's experiences and would not have been included otherwise." Statistically, the numbers associated with Murphy's life remain astonishing. Beyond his 33 combat decorations, his films grossed more than $50 million during his lifetime, approximately $400 million in today's currency. His autobiography sold more than 1 million copies and remains in print more than 70 years after its initial publication. The Audie Murphy Research Foundation estimates that his advocacy work directly influenced veterans' health care policies, affecting more than 3 million former service members. Yet perhaps the most powerful aspect of Murphy's legacy is how it continues to resonate with new generations who never saw his films in theaters or read about his exploits in contemporary news accounts. Each year, thousands of military personnel and civilians visit his grave at Arlington, leaving coins, notes, and other tokens of respect. Military academies still teach his tactical innovations, particularly his effective use of terrain and his understanding of the psychological aspects of combat. Army Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Simmons, an instructor at the United States Military Academy at West Point, explains, "Murphy's actions at Holtzwihr demonstrate principles we still teach today. The force multiplication possible through superior position, the psychological impact of unexpected resistance, the value of individual initiative in fluid combat situations." Beyond the physical courage, which was extraordinary, his tactical decision-making remains worthy of study. The transformation of warfare since Murphy's time has been profound, with technology replacing many functions once performed by individual soldiers. Yet military leaders continue to emphasize that no amount of technological advantage can replace the human qualities Murphy exemplified: courage, adaptability, and the will to prevail against overwhelming odds. In this sense, his legacy remains not just relevant, but essential to modern military training. Major General Thomas Harrington, speaking at a ceremony marking the 50th anniversary of Murphy's Medal of Honor action, observed, "In an age of precision-guided munitions and remote warfare, we might be tempted to think the era of individual heroism has passed. Nothing could be further from the truth. Today's conflicts still ultimately depend on the decisions and actions of individual soldiers in complex, chaotic environments." Murphy's example of clear thinking and decisive action under extreme pressure remains as relevant now as it was in 1945. The statistical evidence bears out this assessment. A 2015 survey of active-duty Army personnel found that 78% recognized Murphy's name, and 63% could correctly identify his most famous action. Among officers, these percentages were even higher, 92 and 87% respectively. For a figure from a conflict that ended more than 7 decades ago, this level of recognition is remarkable. Beyond military circles, Murphy's story continues to resonate with civilians who see in his journey a quintessentially American narrative of overcoming adversity through determination and courage. From poverty-stricken beginnings to national hero status, his life embodied the ideal of upward mobility through merit rather than privilege. That he achieved all this while maintaining a sense of humility and service to others only enhances his appeal as a national icon. The ironic twist in Murphy's story, that America's most decorated soldier would become one of its most prominent advocates for recognizing the psychological costs of combat, adds a layer of complexity that continues to make his life worthy of study. In an era when simplistic narratives about military service often dominate public discourse, Murphy's example reminds us that heroism and vulnerability can coexist in the same individual. Dr. James Harrison, a psychologist specializing in combat trauma, observes, Murphy's willingness to acknowledge his struggles humanized the experience of combat in a way that pure, heroic narratives cannot. By speaking openly about his nightmares and anxiety, he helped create space for a more honest conversation about war's impact on those who fight it. This may ultimately prove as important a contribution as his battlefield heroism. As Murphy himself once said, in words that seem prescient given our current understanding of trauma, the real heroes are the men who died. The rest of us are just lucky. This humility, this refusal to accept uncritical adulation, speaks to a deeper understanding of war's realities than most civilians, and indeed many veterans, ever achieve. The enduring power of Audie Murphy's story lies in its contradictions. The smallest soldier becoming the most decorated, the soft-spoken youth commanding hardened veterans, the hero haunted by the very actions that earned him adulation, the movie star who never quite believed in his own fame. These paradoxes make him not just a hero, but a fully human one whose struggles and triumphs continue to resonate across generations. On that January day in 1945, as he stood atop a burning tank destroyer, facing an overwhelming enemy force, Audie Murphy demonstrated what humans are capable of in the most extreme circumstances. His subsequent life, with its successes, failures, advocacy, and struggles, demonstrated something equally important, that even the most extraordinary heroes carry with them the cost of their heroism, and that true courage includes acknowledging those wounds rather than denying them. In the final analysis, the most remarkable aspect of Murphy's legacy may be not the incredible stand at Holtzwihr that earned him the Medal of Honor, but the fact that after experiencing combat at its most intense, after killing more enemy soldiers than anyone could count, he retained his essential humanity. He never glorified war, never sought to relive his moments of combat, except when doing so might help others understand its realities, and consistently used his fame to advocate for those whose struggles went unrecognized. As America continues to send young men and women into harm's way, the example of Audie Murphy, both his battlefield courage and his post-war honesty, remains profoundly relevant. His legacy reminds us that we owe our veterans not just recognition of their sacrifice, but also understanding of their ongoing struggles, and that sometimes the greatest acts of courage occur not on the battlefield, but in the quiet acknowledgement of war's enduring cost. The transformation from frightened human to unflinching warrior, from poverty-stricken boy to national hero, from combat survivor to advocate for others. These are the journeys that define Audie Murphy's remarkable life. In a world that too often seeks simple narratives of heroism or victimhood, his complex example continues to challenge us to see the full humanity of those who serve and to acknowledge both their extraordinary capabilities and their very human vulnerabilities. As Murphy himself once wrote in a poem found among his personal papers after his death, "Alone and far removed from earthly care, the noble ruins of men lie buried here. You were strong men, good men, endowed with youth and much the will to live. I hear no protest from the mute lips of the dead. They rest, there is no more to give.